And yet there are other times where you look back, and I've looked back and I've gone, you know what? Man, I wish I'd done that differently. Man, I'm not really all that proud of that. I'm not real thankful for the choice I made or the attitude I had. Well, I'm going to start with a happier memory of a time where I was glad because of what I did. See, back in college, I had kind of an up and down experience. Started more down because, well, I wasn't living for God. I was living for myself, very self-indulgent. And this is my BB era before Brooke. And so during that time in my life, I had a life-changing experience after a breakup. And some of you know what it's like. You go through something difficult, and it's like God opens your eyes to reality. And so I went through a really pretty bad breakup in a relationship that had not been godly. It was not God-honoring. It's not something I was proud of. And we broke up after a year and a half of being together. What happened that I'm proud of is a couple months later, my ex-girlfriend made an appearance at my house one night, unannounced. She'd been drinking alcohol. She had dolled herself up, and she was trying to get back in a relationship with me. And she was turning it on strongly. And I resisted, which I just got to say, for where I had been, that wasn't the norm. And so I was really proud of myself. I'm glad I resisted because 3 months later, I met my wife. You know, I had no idea. That's us when we started dating. I did have hair at one point. I have proof. I have proof right there. I did. But we started dating, and then she ended up becoming my wife. And God has done some amazing things. And I actually passed the class. It was a little bit more than just showing. Actually passed the class. It was a little bit more than just showing up and just skating by and barely passing the class. And so I decided I was going to make a cheat sheet. And I don't know about you guys, but if you've ever made a cheat sheet before, and probably none of you have done this, but this is before smartphones, so I know a lot of you just take pictures of stuff and then it's like right there on your phone. But I was like writing down terms and definitions in very small handwriting. And so like I had a little piece of paper. I'll give you kind of an example. Some of you, actually, you have pieces of paper if you're here. So it's about that size of that square you have. Yep, you can put that back down. And so I wrote in really small letters, and I was really excited about cheating on this test because it had the perfect setup. They had these long black tables. It was a science class, and then they had these little cubbies underneath. And so I could just tuck my cheat sheet there. And I thought I had mastered the technique of the up-down with putting my hand here. Where some people do that and they want to sleep in class. But I utilized this for like the up-down where I kind of looked through and make sure my teacher wasn't looking at me. And so then I could look down in the cubby and I could like angle my eyes to see and then and I was doing really good on the test. Like I was cruising. I was like, everything I'd written down, I was like, it's amazing. It's on the test. I'm going to ace this. It's like I didn't even have to study. I just had this little cheat sheet right there. And so like I'd been doing the up and down, and I spent a good while looking down after my last up, and I don't know how long it was, but all of a sudden when I looked up again, my teacher was no longer at the front of the room. In fact, I felt a presence behind me. And I was kind of like, oh, I won't tell you what I thought. And behind me was my looming large teacher looking down at me, and he looked at me and said, Mr. Marston, you're done, sir. And he extended his hand, and he wanted my test, and he wanted my cheat sheet, and he wrote 0 on my test. Now, I don't say that like I'm proud, because that's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to be at this stage of my life and look back on that and say that's how I lived. That's how I operated. But being caught doing something wrong stinks. I had that feeling in my stomach like, oh no, like are they going to call my parents? Like, what's going to happen? Am I going to fail this class? And so it was a really bad feeling. But the bad thing about me at that point in time is I was more sorry that I got caught doing something wrong rather than being sorry for actually doing something wrong. And there's a big difference. I was sorry I was caught, not for actually my action. And so I was thinking about you guys that maybe you've had experiences like this in your life where you were caught doing something wrong. So I want to ask you, have you ever been caught doing something wrong? Were you sorry you were caught doing something wrong? Or were you sorry that you had done something wrong? There's a big difference. And I started thinking about the time I was a youth pastor, which it's been a little while now, but I did that for 17 years. I loved it. I loved working with the next generation. And so at one point, I had a leadership team of 120 people. So it was a big leadership team. And sometimes it was hard to keep up with everybody. Like, I actually had a team of people that helped me care for our leadership team. But there was one particular week where I found out that two of my leaders were having affairs. That's not fun. But they said being a youth pastor would be fun. Like, I can't delegate. Can you call these volunteers and talk to them about their sin? Can you talk to them about their adultery? And it was heartbreaking because in the one situation, a husband came to me and he said, your middle school volunteer is sleeping with my wife. Like, he just dropped by my office and sat down and told me that. And of course, I asked the question, how do you know? Like, how do you know that? Like, I can't just take your word. He said, I have photographic proof. He said, I hired a private investigator, and they got pictures of your volunteer walking into a hotel room with my wife. Do you want to see them? I said, I'm good. So that week, I have to call this guy and say, I heard you're having an affair. You made a commitment, being a volunteer with kids, that you would not have sex with someone out of the context of marriage. And so this person that you were with is married to someone else. And tell me about that. Like, this is what's been brought to my attention. And he just said, yeah. And he was nonchalant. Kind of like, what was my problem for bringing it up? And I was incredulous. Like, I was like, what? Like, he was frustrated with me that he wasn't going to be able to serve with the kids anymore. And I'm like, you do understand that your example matters. So I had to fire a volunteer that day. And then we have to tell the kids that he's not coming back. And we're not going to go say, hey, he's out having sex with another man's wife. I mean, they're in middle school. But I'm going to tell you what, it was so sad to me to see that he was more frustrated that was brought to light than actually being sorry for what he did. And he ended up busting up that marriage and marrying that lady. I'm just like, and it brings me all to this habit we're going to talk about today and why it's so important. Because I don't think he just got there quickly. Like, that was a slow drift of justification of, well, it's just hanging out with a friend. You know, it's just talking online. I'm sure it was a slow drift of, hey, we'll just go hang out for a little while. We'll just go get something to eat. But obviously they emotionally had bonded because then they're finding themselves at a hotel room. They just didn't say like one day, hey, let's go to a hotel room. No, they slowly drifted there. And what can happen with us, with most of our sin, if we don't address it quickly, is we can drift to something much bigger and greater that can cause a fall and hurt us and other people. And it's why today we're going to talk about this next habit, the habit of godly sorrow. Godly sadness about our sin. This habit's critically important because if we don't practice it, well, we're in danger of finding ourselves much further away from God and people than we ever wanted to be. In this series, this whole idea of the habits of connection has been to connect us more with God and with each other. Like, that's what we long for, right? We were made for relationship with God, and we want to have great relationships with each other, with the people we may be married to, or the people we may be dating, our kids, our parents, our friends. We want to have great relationships. We crave it. And so we are doing this series to help us have great relationships with God and with people. And so far we've talked about the habit of self-examination. We've talked about the habit of simplicity and the habit of solitude and meditation. And today, again, we're talking about the habit of godly sorrow. Now, the devil doesn't want you to develop this habit. He wants to keep you in the throes of your sin, to be locked down. Because what he knows, just like it happened with Adam and Eve at the very beginning, is that when you sin and you're stuck in your sin, what you begin to step on is a cycle of guilt and shame. Guilt and shame. Which keeps you feeling disconnected from God and from people. I read a book with a group of men recently called The Deep-Rooted Marriage. And the thing that was interesting about this book is it really wasn't a lot about your marriage specifically, even though it led there. Like, really a lot of it was about your story and the things that are underneath the surface, the roots that maybe are from the past that need to be pulled out so that you can establish great roots together in your marriage. I mean, we got there, but one of the things they talked about a lot is dealing with your guilt and shame. And they said this about guilt and shame. That guilt is when we feel bad for what we've done, thought, or felt. Shame is the sense that we are bad for what we've done, thought, or felt. Now, if we are constantly meditating on, you know what, no, go back to that first quote, please. Thank you. If we're constantly meditating on, I feel bad, I feel bad, I feel bad, I feel bad, I am bad, I am bad, I am bad, I am bad. How close am I going to be to God? How close am I going to be to someone else if this is the meditation of my heart? This is why in this series we've said to change your habits, you have to change your heart. But only God can change the heart, right? We can't change our heart. We can't generate a goodness. God is the one who's good. Apart from him, we're not good. And the bad thing about shame, it like metastasizes like cancer. And so if we stay stuck in the cycle of guilt and shame because we're holding on to our sin, we're not bringing it to God, this is what happens with shame. It skews our worth, it isolates us, and it inhibits us from experiencing what we deeply need and long for. And that's connection with other people. That's connection with God. I'll speak for me. I don't need anything else to get in the way of my relationship with God and people. Do you? I want there to be a clear channel. I don't want to go around missing out on great relationship because I'm so trapped in this spin of I've done bad, I feel bad for doing bad, I am bad. I feel bad for doing bad, I am bad. But that's exactly where the devil wants to keep you. That is a prison. That's like giving the devil the keys to your house and say, hey, here's your bedroom. Just make a home right here. Giving the devil the keys to your car. Say, devil, you drive. You would never do that. The devil's going to wreck your life. He's going to mess up your house. And that's what happens when we stay trapped in the cycle of shame and guilt. Now, to help us develop the habit of godly sorrow, we're going to look at a letter in the New Testament written by Paul that we know as 2 Corinthians. And this group of Christians that Paul is writing to are from the city of Corinth. And he went to visit them on his second missionary journey, about 51 AD. And he was there for about 18 months where he preached Jesus and people came to know Jesus and he established this church. And it was like, wow, Paul did some great things there. And then he left and he went and he started other churches and he ministered in other places. But when he left, the Corinthians, they went back to some old ways. They had a problem with sexual immorality. Sex outside the context of marriage. They were sexually immoral. They had a problem with idol worship. They had a problem with disunity. I follow this person. No, I follow this person. And so they were very fractured in this church. And it grieved Paul because they were like his children, his spiritual children. And if you have family, how does it feel when your family isn't getting along? When your family's at odds? If you've ever been part of a church where a church is at odds and the church family's not doing well, how does that feel? They were dealing with that. And so Paul, he writes 1 Corinthians to address some of this. But they didn't change their ways. They rebelled against him. They didn't submit themselves to his teaching. And so then we see in 2 Corinthians, he paid them what he calls a painful visit. Now, I don't know exactly what that visit was like, but what we can infer is that he spoke truth that they did not necessarily want to embrace. He addressed the sin. He had to make the phone call, so to speak, and say, hey, you're sleeping with someone else's wife. What's up with that? Paul went and addressed this. And he left. And they still didn't change their ways. Like, what is their problem? They keep doing the same thing. They keep rebelling against God. And Paul's like, I want so much more for you. So then he writes a letter, and he describes it as a letter written in anguish and tears. Have you ever written a letter in anguish and in tears? Maybe you've typed something up. You've sent a text in anguish and tears. Because you just want something more for somebody than what they're actually living, what they're experiencing. His heart was broken, but it was apparently a pretty hard-hitting letter. We don't have this in the scriptures. But they refer to it in 2 Corinthians. And his disciple Titus comes and sees Paul in another place, and he says, Paul, after they received your letter that you wrote in anguish and in tears, they actually saw their sin and they repented, which means changed their mind. They changed their mind about their sin. They saw it for what it was, and God used it to humble them, Paul. And Paul was so happy, and so he writes 2 Corinthians to assure the Corinthian church of his love for them. To say, guys, I wanted so much more for you, and you've responded, and you've repented of your sexual immorality, you've repented of your idol worship, you've repented of your disunity. I just want to say, I love you. And so in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 8, we see Paul talking about this very thing. And he says, even if I caused you sorrow, which can mean sadness, by my letter, I do not regret it. But then we see Paul say, well, wait a minute, though I did regret it. So, yeah, big picture, I didn't regret it. But initially, I did regret it because I see that my letter hurt you, but only for a little while. As a parent, not all of you are parents, but as a parent, when you've had to discipline your kids, have you ever felt regret? You may be even have done it in a very godly way, but you see how much they're hurting? Do you ever feel that, oh, I hate that my kid is suffering right now. I love them so much. I want so much more for them. And Paul was like that toward his spiritual children in Corinth. But then we see a second response in verse 9. He says, yet now I am happy. So he had regret, but now he's happy, not because you were made sorry, because we can just be sorry that we got caught. I just feel bad about my sin, and I guess I am bad. Or we can say, You know what? No, your sorrow, your sadness about your sin led you to repentance, which is a change of mind. In order for you to change your actions, you have to change your mind. And so they changed their mind about their sin. And so Paul was made happy because of it. And he says, for you became sorrowful as God intended, as God desired. And so you are not harmed in any way by us. They didn't lash out at Paul and say, yeah, what's your problem from calling me and pointing this sin out? No, they humbled themselves. They received the correction. They received the rebuke. And they repented. They changed their mind about their sin. It opened up the channel with God, with Paul, and with the other people. Don't you want that for your relationships? This is why this habit is so important. You can't have the relationships you desire without practicing the habit of godly sorrow. And then in verse 10, he writes, godly sorrow brings repentance. Godly sorrow brings a change of mind. That leads to what? Salvation, at least say it again. And leaves no what? No regret. I've never met someone that says, I want to have more regret in my life. Can I please have more regret? I've never met someone to say that. But yet, how many people live in a way where they're unrepentant about their sin and they lead lives of regret? And then he says, worldly sorrow brings what? What? Death. Just being sorry that you got caught. I'm sorry this happened. And see, death is living in that cycle of guilt and shame. I am bad, or I did bad, I am bad. I did bad, I am bad. That is a trap. See, godly sorrow, when you really are genuinely sad for what you've done, it brings a repentance. Worldly sorrow brings death. Now, let me compare and contrast these a little bit more. A person with worldly sorrow, they try to hide. They try to hide. Just like I was trying to hide when I was cheating. I was trying to hide